participants, excellencies, colleagues. I want to present some thoughts about Krymsky perception of Sufism. And of course, I want to say that I'm not a specialist in Sufi studies, in Persian literature, but I'm very interested in the topic. So I try to show this side of Agathangel Krymskyi to you. As we've told, Krymsky was very narrow, open-minded person. He has a very wide range of scientific and personal interests. He was historian, philologist, translator, and what is the most important in the context of my speech today, that he was also the writer and poet by itself, by himself. It will have influence on his Sufi perception. And if we are talking about his legacy about Sufism, we will use 10 minutes on it. So I will mention three very significant works of him. It's the history of Persia, its literature, and the dervish Theosophy. It's a huge work, contains 3 volumes about Sufism and Persian history in general. It's also his Persian history and literature in Ukrainian language. And also I have to mention his collaboration with the Brockhaus and Euphron Encyclopedic Dictionary, which is very important because it was the huge encyclopedic project in Russian Empire, and Krymsky contributed much in it, writing the many articles on Islam, on Sufism, on the history of Islamic countries. But I decided to make Jalaluddin Rumi as the main key today for understanding Krymsky's perception of Sufism. Agathangel Krymskyi was not a translator of Rumi, I should admit, but he was an editor of translations of other people of Rumi. His colleague, the academist Korsh, made a great translations of Rumi, and Krymsky was the editor of this volume. And in his Persian history I mentioned before, he provided us a great comment on these translations. And there we find a very significant point from him, which allow us to understand his perception of Sufi poetry and Sufism in general. He taught there about 2 approaches to the translation of Sufi poetry. And he kind of made a discussion with his colleague, the British translator Edward Winfield, on the sheets of his book. And he described 2 approaches to the translations of Sufism, of Sufi poetry. One approach is his own, and other approach of the Edward Winfield. And he told that Winfield pay attention mostly on the second part of Rumi's parables, ignoring the first part. As we know, many Rumi's parables contains 2 parts. First one contains the narrative, the plot, of the story actually. And the second part contains the moralistic, the didactic message. And for Winfield, this didactic, theoretical, and probably transcendental message was more important than this first part, which contains story. For Krymsky, everything is vice versa. He appreciated more the first part of the parables of Rumi. He called it belletristic part. And that's why he proposed to translate more elaborately exactly this first part of Rumi's parables. And what conclusion we can make from it? That Krymsky was not much into Sufi mystic. He felt the Sufi poetry more on aesthetic level. And this actually the story, the narrative of the Sufis, of the Rumi's parable was more important for him. And the same conclusion we also can make from another points of Agathangel Krymskyi. He divided Sufism on two branches, or here we're talking about two directions of development of the Sufism, the Eastern one and Western. Western direction was under the great influence of Christian ascetic movements for him, and the Eastern direction, it's Persian Sufism in itself, and the Sufism of the countries eastward from Iran. This direction he describes as pantheistic, and this direction was under the great influence of Indian culture, Indian religions like Jainism, Buddhism, and of their Neoplatonic movements. It grasped my attention, the fact that he called this Eastern Sufism pantheistic. I wanted to know why it happened so, why he had such views on it. And reading his comments to the Rumi's poetry, to the poetry of other poets, I understand one thing, that Krymsky really grasped the pantheistic idea of many poems by Sufi poets, but he kind of ignore more other spiritual endeavors of Sufi poets. Like the variety of spiritual experience was very, very great, but he grasped this idea, this real experience of Sufi poet who really felt the dissolving in God, who really felt the God's presence in everything, but didn't pay attention for other experiences which sometimes contradict this pantheistic experience. So again, we see here, as for me, the special perception of Krymsky, his own unique perception of Sufism, like aesthetic, on aesthetic level, like on an aesthetic level. Not on the transcendental or mystical level. My time is going to be the end, so thank you for attention. I provided kind of discussive points here, but I hope it will be possible to discuss it and to find the truth in the discussion. Thank you.